So, hello and welcome to the new episode of With the Knights of Terror, Rats, 1981, the badly dubbed future, 2015, with fancy buddy hair and ties. Okay, to this episode of My Mum Said in the future you could view this, or otherwise known as My Mum Said I could watch it. Welcome to, let me just, I think that might be a bit too loud, so I'm just going to turn that down. After the Bomb, year 2225, After the Bomb. Palladium Games, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle crossover where every animal was a mutation. Yes, that is where we're at. Nor are we in the James Herbert Rats trilogy. Knights of Terror, Rats, Knights of Terror. There's a 1984 film. I rented this probably about 10. Absolutely no memory except having seen it, and the denouement. For those of you who don't know it, firstly, it doesn't have anything to do with the James Herbert books, The Rat Lair and Domain. I thought that it was loosely based on sort of scrunching them together and making Domain. It's a post-apocalyptic story, group of kids, in a way not that different from Return of the Living Dead or most horror films of the time. It's except for the fact that it's not an American group, it's an Italian group, badly dubbed, but it's the kids are just a bunch of wastrels, it may seem. Find themselves a place to stay with great riches and so on, but also like finding a golden fleece. Find out that the place is got rats. When I say it's got rats, it's got rats. Flesh-eating rats by the thousands. Food of the gods level rats. What follows is their trip through this subterranean high-tech lair, like Eloy's serving themselves to Morlocks for Christmas, until after a bunch of happenstance and a lot of deaths, only 2 of them survive, thinking they've been rescued, but it turns out that they open a face mask and they're rats themselves. It's this is something that I really can't not stress. It's an Italian film from the 80s, so as such is really badly dubbed. Subtitles were not a thing. They certainly wouldn't have been part of my remit then, unless it was a cartoon. The plus sides are on this version, and it's very hard to say. I do believe this is the one I would have seen. Although I was shocked. Firstly, the characters, it's very hard to judge them. There was a sad moment in the early noughties when anime was being imported, but just the films, basically. People would somehow be able to bootleg the films, but with no translations and with a lack of knowledge or internet. A thing called fan dubbing occurred, which was like an episode of Whose Line Is This Anyway? Except being done by 14-year-old prurient teenagers. Except they wouldn't be prurient 14-year-old teenagers, they'd be 24-year-olds. And that was even worse, because the pathos of such, no, you're taking the book, right, just doesn't hold. This has elements of that, unfortunately. You don't get much of the characters themselves. Much less the rather unfortunately named Video and Chocolate, who end up being the survivors of this. I would say that fashion-wise, they look amazing. This is the best Shoreditch crew I've ever seen outside of Shoreditch. And actually better than anything in Shoreditch, because I actually cared. And I think the main reason I cared is because they largely do look out for each other. They are a genuine team. There's sacrifice that's made. There's peacekeeping, particularly by Chocolate, who herself, as well as being very unfortunately named, does come across as, after the captains, Kurt, she's probably the most together, understands that it is a group that needs to survive, and is the final girl out of it all. She is at times sensitive to other people's anxieties, particularly with the girls, while being quite forceful with the guys. And I do suspect, between not just their hair but also the whole attire, and the fact that she has a javelin gun of some description. It may have had some role in fact most of them seem to have had some role in the Dungeons and Dragons look of later years. One of them is definitely Cavalier. There's no way around it. It works well in terms of giving that character engagement. The backstory of the lab and the scientists is done piecemeal enough, but unfortunately I think it's protracted a bit too much. Randy guys get jumped on by rats out of sewer rings, and that's kind of interesting at how they create those situations, but again, there's a dearth of pacing around it. Yes, it's substantiated by an incredible synth mix. It is just an incredible synth mix that I can see downloading any sort of bar ringtone kind of thing. Probably be deemed a bit 2016 to new Gen Z guys, but really, stylistically, it's fine, right? Aesthetically, they've done a lot with what they've got. It's really about the fashion and the music, which, whenever you're focusing on young people, should really all it is about. It's got a certain sense of violence and threat, although the rat deaths, just because there's no way you could make them look realistic, are quite paling. People committing suicide from the fear of the rats, to those who get jumped on them, to those who are sacrificing themselves. So what exactly is it that's wrong with this film? I would say it's pacing. It's pacing. The sound is great, but it's ultimately wallpaper. I'm hesitant because I don't know if it's the subtitles that are getting in the way of the acting range, or is it just the fact that I'm watching a film from 1984. I know that my main interest in it at the time would have been James Herbert, so I feel a bit missold. That will always be an aspect of this. This is no Domain. Domain had a nuclear bomb shelter around the Clapham South station. You just stay in there, it's fine. Incidentally, true story. But the pacing is off. The denouement, after all that survival of some sort of rat man in a thing, it's a nice shocking thing, but it's not really. I mean, I suspect that this is what Tim Burton's ripped off, rather than trying to come up with anything of his own out of Kevin Smith's world. Is it worth a punt? Well, I think actually the best way to watch it, in all honesty, is it is worth a punt, but it's a glancing film. It's exactly what you're doing here now. It sounds brilliant as well. I've got to say, for that alone, I can see myself sticking this on, picking up my latest copy of I forgot here, Judge Dredd magazine, which I think would go very well with this. Maybe a little glass of lemonade, and really relive the 80s. Aside from that, making any real venture of focus or concentration in the film, you are just going to give yourself a migraine. There is that problem. It just stretches credulity too far. It does look good when there is gore. It's not so much about the attacks, the aftermath. And I gotta say, I was really surprised about the nuddy. It's proper hairy nuddy. I wasn't really ready for hairy nuddy. I don't know how. I must have been cut out by the time I was seeing it at like 9 or 10. But yeah, so it's a time passer. It is a wallpaper film in that sense. I'm sorry to say, I think it had the potential to be so much more, and maybe there's an original cut or something where you aren't dubbed over with, yeah, this food's great, I'll have some great food as well. Random people who say that they read this book one time, like, yeah, and rats smell urine. I mean, while those things are factually true, I refer you to Batman in the Flash, given the fact that he lives in a world without any superheroes whatsoever, happens to be an expert on time travel. Aesthetics great. Pop in, come pop by, enjoy the party for about 10-20 minutes. Place to revisit, not for long. Couple of messages and a coffee, but this is not a night out. Okay guys, thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed, and of course thank you for the bits on My Mum Said I Could Watch It.